Our next question comes from our friend John. He's a big fan of the channel. He's been following it for a while. He's 20 years old and is interested in combat sports, particularly in boxing. He says this, but I know there is risk with the territory, and I've had a license for amateurs before, but because of the risk and the injuries I've got from sparring, I have been on the fence on trying to compete. The stories of boxers dying from ring injuries and those who have to deal with CTE are things that really make me question whether I should or shouldn't, because I don't want to become someone I don't like, or worse, pass away. I have my girlfriend and my family, and I don't want them to lose me before it's my time. Anyhow, with that being said, I've tried to read up on and watch every possible video on brain damage and CTE, and just trying to find any bit of knowledge that could help me, or any other potential fighters, to prevent or avoid brain damage. I was able to find something. I found 4 things, and I'm trying to get into contact with any doctors to see if these things are actually real or if they are just pseudoscience. I thought this would be something worth looking into and to see where your thoughts are on the matter. The 4 things are cerebrolysin, beta blockers, metonine, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I appreciate your work and your perspective on combat sports, etc., etc. Okay. All right, John, thanks for the question, and your concerns are indeed merited because combat sports are inherently dangerous. Boxing, in particular, when you get hit in the head, what happens? Your brain rocks around inside of your skull and it takes damage. Every time you get punched, that's brain damage. Now, brain damage is a term that has some stigma attached to it. Yeah, we hear brain damage and we think somebody who's a vegetable sitting there drooling or whatever. And that is not the extent of what brain damage is. Anytime your brain is damaged in any way, that's brain damage. How much of that is permanent? How much of that has a noticeable adverse effect on your physiology, your behavior, your thinking, etc.? Well, it's all relative. So, yeah, I won't sugarcoat it for you. Combat sports are dangerous, and getting hit will damage your brain. It simply will. They might even kill you. You will get injured to some extent. To what extent, I don't know. That's highly variable. It depends on a lot of things. Now, you asked for my opinion on these 4 things. I don't understand them at all. I don't know anything about beta blockers or those chemicals or hyperbolic oxygen chamber therapy. I've never used any of that stuff. I've never studied it. I don't know. I have read and heard reports and studies and all these other things about other things that are supposed to reduce the adverse effects of blunt force trauma. Somebody went so far as to publish this paper on long distance running and say that's good to help reverse the effects of blunt force trauma to the brain. I don't know if that's true. But as a combat sports coach, I'm going to level with you and tell you the most important and immediate thing you can do is avoid as many hits to the head as you can. So you mentioned sparring, getting injured in sparring. And that's a big red flag to me right there. I know it is very common in boxing gyms to go hard in the gym. And essentially, instead of sparring sessions, they're fights. And you see these gym fights all the time in boxing gyms. This is pretty normal, and I don't think it should be. It's part of boxing culture, but I don't think it should be. Because it creates this meat grinder where only those guys who are lucky enough to be good enough early on enough to avoid the damage in the gym actually go on to excel in the sport. And even then, often have fairly limited and short careers. I want you to think about our friend Terrible Tim Witherspoon. If you don't know who this fellow is, he was a 2-time heavyweight boxing champion of the world. He was a sparring partner of Muhammad Ali and some other great old school boxers. And he boxed for a long time. He had a long career. He was fighting, winning fights, knocking dudes out into his mid to late 40s. And if you watch the way that he fought, you might start to understand why. And if you watch the way he trains and the way he still teaches to this day, you might start to understand why. Because he puts this huge, huge emphasis on defense, on keeping your guard up, on minimizing the damage that you take. And if you watch some of his best fights, you know, these 12-round wars, where he finishes with a big knockout punch at the end, watch what he's doing with his guard. He is minimizing the damage. I think, I'm blanking on the name of his opponent. It was a great fight. It was like a 12-round fight, and I think he only took like less than a dozen significant strikes during the entire fight. I mean, there were a ton of punches exchanged, but most of them being caught on the arms rather than the head. So what I'm trying to communicate here, one, go watch Tim's channel and go subscribe because he's awesome, man. Love that dude. And you'll learn a lot from him to this day. And he's still sparring to this day. As an older gentleman, he is still sparring with his students. How is he able to do that? One, good defense, but two, also good sparring practices. You'll notice they're not trying to murder each other in the ring. They're trying to learn and teach and transmit and convey knowledge. And that's the way you need to spar, right? So number one, work your defense, keep your guard up, minimize the punches that you take. And two, change the way that you spar. Stop fighting in the gym and start learning in the gym. Go at a sustainable pace where you can do it every day. And if you're sparring at a pace where you're like, oh man, I only have one of those in me this week, you're not going to get very good at boxing. I'm not saying never ever spar hard. There isn't a time and a place for that, but most of the time, no. No. The day-to-day sparring should be light, controlled, technical. That's the only way to get enough of it in order to ensure longevity in your career. Second thing I would tell you, besides work your defense and change your training practices so you're not getting hurt, is this. Something I wish somebody would have told me. Manage your career carefully. When I started, I kind of grew up in this tough guy culture. I'm not saying I was a tough guy, because, man, I really wasn't, but I grew up in this tough guy culture, this machismo type of culture, where fight culture, specifically what I'm talking about, where you just can't say no to a fight. Where if you turn down a challenge, you're not a real man, you're not a real fighter. You might as well just bow out and go. And I wish, in retrospect, I could time travel back to the past and tell myself, no, don't take that fight. Don't take that fight. You're not ready yet. Take this one instead. And I'm not saying that to pad a career. Please don't try to pad your career by beating up soup cans that you know don't stand a chance against you. You know, you want to be challenged, right? And fight promoters want to put on good, compelling fights. But at the same time, don't be stupid and don't take fights against monsters who are way above your level, who are going to crush you and make you look foolish, and worse, injure you. And this is true in boxing, MMA, etc. I got talked into taking a fight against a dude who was just so much better at jiu-jitsu than I was. He was a third-degree black belt, world champion, super high-level jiu-jitsu. And I went into this fight, an MMA fight, thinking, well, worst thing that happens is I'll tap out, because, you know, he wants to prove his jiu-jitsu works, so he's just going to try to submit me. I won't take a lot of damage. What happened? He ripped my shoulder out of the socket. So I ended up with a separated shoulder there. And I had another fight the following, 3 days later, and then another one the following week. And it's kind of hard to fight when you have a dislocated left shoulder. You don't have a jab when you do that. And if you want to fight defensively and minimize your damage, you got to understand your jab. And if you don't have that, man, you don't have much. If you don't have the ability to keep that left arm up and block when you need to, you don't have much. So carefully manage your career, man. CTE, is it real? All that really means is chronic damage through blunt force trauma to the brain. That's it. It's a real thing. Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, if you bang up your brain and get a bunch of scar tissue in there over and over and over and over again, that's a bad thing. Yeah, that's real. So minimize that. But ultimately, after reading your letter, and I probably should have started with this, the overwhelming feeling I got was you don't want to fight. Like you're interested in training. I can tell you're very interested in boxing. Like it's something you love. Maybe you love to watch it, you love to train, you love the idea of competing. Maybe you love the thrill of the fight and all that. I knew this guy and he loved MMA. He absolutely loved it. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was a huge fan. And he loved the idea of being a fighter. And so he signed up for a low-level professional fight and he got his butt kicked. But he loved the euphoria of getting in the cage. Oh man, he was like, oh man, I love it. It's my favorite thing. I would die without this feeling. It's so good. It was like a drug to him. And so he did it again and he got his butt kicked and he got hurt a little bit. And he kept going back and he kept getting hurt worse. And people tried to talk him down like, dude, you're not good at this. You're not even training. It's combat addiction is what it is. And in retrospect, knowing what I know now, I wish I could have spoken in earnest to my friend back then and let him know what I know today. So it's entirely possible you're enamored with the sport. Maybe you're addicted to the sport. Maybe you're addicted to the lights and the crowd and the ring girls or whatever it is. I don't know. But the reality is people get hurt in fights. Whether you win or lose, you're going to take damage. So let's be really, really real about that. Again, the crux of your letter was, I like this idea of fighting, but I don't actually want to fight. Not everybody needs to fight, man. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.